Why don't we start with some intros? I'll go first before I hand it off to Sarah and AJ. I'm Grant Hultgren. I'm head of customer success here at Parallax, and I've actually worked with both these individuals before, and I'm really appreciative that they were able to join here today to talk margin and operations and sales and all the things I think that we've been seeing here in 2024 around digital agencies. But I'll hand it off here. Sarah, why don't you go first? Do a quick intro.
Sure. Excellent. First off, Grant, thank you for allowing us this opportunity, and to your team at Parallax for hosting. I'm Sarah Leith. I have the great privilege to serve as general manager of Creed. I joined the organization in 2021. I have been there for the last few years. And with that, AJ, I'll pass to you.
Hi, I'm AJ Jahnig. I'm Senior Director of Operations and Delivery, which is a mouthful, but at the end of the day is effectively lead day-to-day operations at Creed. I've been at Creed since 2015. Originally got hired as a little baby associate PM, worked my way up, and now I'm proud to say that I'm leading the project management team and then day-to-day operations.
Yeah, thanks. And for those folks here that are joining, tell us about Creed. What's your history? What do you specialize in? How do you see yourselves in the market?
Sure. I can maybe kick this off, AJ, if that's all right. Creed was actually founded in 2007. And at the time, probably like a lot of founder stories, our founder had worked at some larger agencies. Was a little frustrated with some overpromise and under delivery. And with that, really held on to a firmly held belief, a creed, if you will, hence our name, that we could do better and that agency part clients deserve better from their partners. And so with that, we were founded, and I feel so proud that we've been able to carry that forward since then into everything that we do today. So Creed's mission is we are a people-first digital agency that goes all in to drive our clients' business forward. And we bring that to life with our core values, of course, but certainly it really comes down to doing our best work for each other, for our clients, and certainly for the people that they serve. And that makes my job easy in the sense that when you can be all in and show up that way, it really matters. As far as the work itself, we specialize in custom development. That can be portals and applications, websites, and certainly the exceptional design and vigilant delivery that goes into making sure those go from concept to launch, and often post-launch maintenance and enhancements as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Sarah. And we'll get into some of that because I think that's evolving to an extent. As I even mentioned earlier, I'm pretty familiar with Creed. I had joined in 2008, and I think there's some similarities, as you had mentioned, founding around just the economic environment, right? We had the housing crash in 2000, and there's this sort of, is there a worse time to start an agency, right? And yet those lean times, I think, brought around a lot of the values that you still exude within your organization. And I'm looking forward to touching on that with you all because I think it gets into this margin conversation. How do we deliver value? How do we make sure we're selling value, that we're supporting our team? And there's some similarities nowadays too when we look at job reports and interest rates and election year and all this sort of stuff that I'm sure a lot of our attendees are thinking like, how do we navigate this? We'll dive in. But in terms of years past in your history, what have you seen in 2024? Maybe from your respective roles as general manager, how's it been what you expected? How's it been different, Sarah?
Yeah, great question, Grant. And as mentioned, I've been here now 3.5 years. I certainly am so lucky to have people like AJ and others in our senior leadership team that have been with us far longer and have assured me that the agency ups and downs are part of it. And with that, I know many of, I'm sure, the other agency leaders and that are on this call can relate to that. And I will say we were really fortunate for coming into the pandemic, having some fairly significant, and I know, Grant, you were a big part of that success too, 6-7-figure partners that were multi-year, really complex projects. And as the pandemic went on, some of that delivery, as expected over the years, we knew we would need to assess and figure out how to lean into the opportunities that we do have, provide more value, strategic value to our clients. And in some ways that created and unlocked some really great new opportunities for us too. I would say that an area that I'm really proud of is how our team doubled down in becoming a bit more strategically consultative with our clients. It was something we've always had. And again, I can speak to that, but in a really intentional way of how we could even lean into getting some of our tech leaders more involved upstream in some of the processes and more engaged in discoveries, and then having that real real, I would say, upfront investment in the success, which they always have, but right from that end-to-end type of framework. And so that helped us really lean in during a time when it could be perceived as a little bit slower, where we actually were upskilling and leaning in. And I don't know if you would add to that, or certainly from a different lens as well.
I can wrap a bow on it. I think I'll steal from Governor Waltz and say that 2024 was a weird year. It has been weird, if only because I feel like it's been whiplash, at least for most agencies, right? And maybe it's true of all years, right? To be an agency is to have whiplash in a lot of ways, but you start the year one way and by the end of the year, everything's changed, right? Maybe in either direction. At least for us, you start the year being like, ooh, this is looking barren in some ways and scary in some ways. And now we're seeing a softening in the market and buying signs in a way that we haven't seen in a really long time. And it allowed us a chance to do a lot of that reflecting that Sarah was talking about. And rather than retool the team and change because of the reaction of the year, like I found a lot of solace in our team of analyzing what we have and doing the best we can with the situation we're in, as opposed to going, great, AI is the thing. So we're an AI agency now and we're going to chasing whatever is hot at the moment or whatever feels the easiest sell or the quickest win. And yeah, that comes with some lumps and that comes with some headaches. But I personally feel like we're in a better position now than we have been in quite some time. And that's indicative of that self-reflection over the last 9 months or so.
So when you're looking at that, maybe some of the, I thought this was going to happen, but this happened, or like an operational basis, right? The way I think you and I have worked together, right? Like the way we want these waves to be nice ebbs and flows, right? We understand there's a sine curve that comes with the business, but we don't want the tidal waves, right? That's where we stay up at night. What have been the common issues that you've seen, and how did you help mitigate those, or what do you think the team did to react to them?
Yeah, I think you can always start with clients in the sense of when things dry up, things change, where maybe contracts we're depending on or lifeline projects that we're supporting whole teams, those change. So it creates this need to go out and find new opportunities. So that was probably the first thing. But I think the biggest thing for us was we've always been a time and material shop in the sense of that's where we've lived, that's where we've breathed. We've always found our best work came from big clients who dedicate budgets to us to iteratively improve, right? That has always been where we've done our best work. And in times like that's our bread and butter, we can lean into that, right? The idea of give us a monthly budget as opposed to a yearly budget. Give us the ability to pivot with you right now as a client. Like we know that things are tight for you. So rather than us saying dedicate the next 9 months to this one deliverable, what if every month we reevaluate that with you, right? So we're conveying a different value to you, right? Because we're much more an extension of your team at that point than this, thing you're tossing over the fence or you're getting reports once a week on how things are going. Like we are effectively an extension of your team. We're almost harkening back to the original value proposition of an agency, which is, hey, why hire internally when you can go externally? And rather than treating us as that separate partner, it really does. My PMs end up being a strategist for our partners, and our developers feel in-house. And for all intents and purposes, we feel white labeled in a lot of ways. And I think that's helped a ton with stability, number one. And then number two, just retro our teams to support our clients in a way that meets them where they are, as opposed to saying, this is the way it's always been done. We need you to continue forward in that way.
Yeah, Sarah, would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think where we found some quick wins too, that I think really, again, provided added value to our clients was in some of those times where maybe we had a little bit of capacity, we were able to look across other teams too. Say, for example, if we've been doing a lot of heads down development work for clients, we maybe pulled in our UX research team and enhanced some design areas where, again, we try to do that ongoing for our clients all the time, but it was a place where we were able to, again, reinforce and provide some extra added value at a time when we felt like that was really important. Because if we were feeling some tightness around our wallet, we know our clients were as well. And I as much as we would double down on providing extra value, I would say we also really doubled down on our processes. We were really leaning into, we've always been very metrics driven, but I would say even more so in evaluating what are the KPIs that we really care about. There's a lot that we care about, but really care about, and lean into those. And in many ways that helped us really focus and prioritize our energies where we wanted to get returns. And I would say more than anything, set us up for success, not just here in Q, but now as we're turning the page to 2025 for our team and for our clients. So that's been a really nice shift from what was certainly, like many of my other colleagues have felt, some rougher years where I think we saw a little bit of hesitation by corporations to maybe make some investments. I think there was a little bit, I hate to say lack of urgency. Maybe it was digital transformation fatigue, but we certainly saw things certainly much slower than they had been in previous years. I'm really excited to see that energy seems to be turning around as we're going into the new year.
Yeah. And so like when you look at margin calculation is, right, revenue divided by cost is what we have left over, right? And it's often a percentage. When your revenue and your pipeline is slower, right, as you're alluding to a little bit, and yeah, you're saying, hey, we're going to specialize, we're going to go and we're going to deliver value in these areas. But I've also heard you say we looked at how we're delivering, right? Now, I know, but you didn't lay a bunch of people off. But how did that change? Like, how did you navigate that then? Of looking at there are two core components to this equation. We don't control the sales pipeline. We can grind all day, but if the market's not there, that's a tough one. How did you look at that, how you're delivering and what that team looked like? How did that change in the course of the year?
Again, I think for the course of the year, one thing we didn't do is, I alluded before, we didn't panic and shake things up unnecessarily. There's some degree of what we were doing was always working. And so just for transparency's sake, one thing we did a couple of years ago is we switched fully over to agile dedicated teams for certain, basically your typical agile team, but then giving them their own portfolio to run, right? This isn't revolutionary or anything, but there is something to be said of when like things slow, that's not the best model. Like that's got an overhead to it. That's got a coordination aspect to it. And I think the knee-jerk reaction would have been blow it up. The knee-jerk reaction would have been like, go back to the old way of doing things where it's that spider web that you see at a typical agency where somebody works on 12 disparate projects with 3 different PMs. And that can get messy in its own right. And I think what we opted to do instead of to lean and go, okay, how do we change or use the current structure we have and think a little bit more about delivering with a higher level of scrutiny for each team? Before it was maybe a little bit more, I don't want to say Wild West, that's not the right term to use, but I think we focused a lot on the typical triangle of project management, right? If we're on scope and on time and on budget, bam, we did great. But that doesn't talk about margin. Like that could mean a margin of $1, right? That could mean we made $1 on the project. And so one thing I think we've done is we have tried to increase the transparency to those teams, right? The idea of, I think there was maybe an old guard thought of, maybe we don't talk about the margin or how much money we could make or not make on a project because you want people focused on the work, right? And we've realized that when we're going to give the keys to the kingdom to a team lead and a project manager for a team, we should also give them the autonomy to understand where those margins sit, right? And I think for me, one of the biggest things is write-offs, which are the worst world in the world where we live, right? But sometimes a write-off to somebody who doesn't understand the margin, it's that saying, yeah, just write it off. It'll just disappear into the mist and everything will be fine. Like I put it on the books. If you actually can talk through, what does that actually mean? Like a write-off negates how much more time beyond that 1 hour, because we might lose margin on additional hours. And so it's that kind of bullwhip effect that you'd see on a project, right? Where it's not as simple, right? And I think by showing the team more of that data, having more access to that information, they understand how to make decisions with almost like a leadership hat on, when normally they would just think of it like a PM or a team lead. How do we get this across the line? And so I think that's been a really big catalyst for us this year.
And so then Sarah, conversely, because I know you're leading some of the sales efforts there. I know you're not solo on that, but how do you convince or support AJ when he's having those conversations around margin and you're like, but we need this wedge offering, right, to get in the door. And I promise you it will it'll get us more work. Like, how have you navigated that side of things where there's risk on the sales side and taking those projects on?
No doubt. And risk is an okay word. Surprises is my least favorite word. So to the extent that, again, I mentioned, how do we bring folks into the fold earlier in the process? Again, I think that sense of collaboration and ownership really matters, especially up front when we know that there's risk involved in maybe taking on a smaller piece of work that we see would be high yield, high return over time. But we've found really great ways to, I think, mitigate some of that risk too. Probably not uncommon for many of the folks on this webinar, starting with some of those smaller discoveries and really building that trust, or making sure that our initial upfront offering is low barrier for that partner, but also then by doing that, it's low barrier for our team too. And I think that one thing I'm really proud of is, despite even at times where we've had maybe a more challenging new business pipeline, we haven't felt desperate, like we need to take on a project just to take it on. Certainly we've taken on some newer projects that maybe grew our team a little, but we doubled down on what do we really do best. We're not going to just say yes to everything or stretch ourselves into a place where it puts our team at a place where they are either spread too thin, or there may be some opportunity to upskill and grow because our developers and our designers really love that challenge, but it needs to be the right one. And so we really take the time to evaluate, is that the right, does that lend long-term value to our other clients? And how are we really approaching those things strategically to mitigate, again, some of that risk for everyone involved, the client and our team?
You make it sound simple.
You know, it's not.
No, I know. And so like we don't have that crystal ball, right? So when you're looking at whether it's a growth project or a new capability that you're thinking, oh, if we could add this to our portfolio, this would help set us up, maybe not next month, but in 6 months or in 12 months. Walk me through how you determined that. Was there data you used? Was it just conversations with the team? How did you make those determinations?
Great question. I would love to say that it was incredibly data driven and we used our in-house models that we built on that data to create the charts. Some of it really was passion led by team members that really wanted to take that on. And we've had some really emerging talent, I would say, within Creed that is, yes, let's take on this other enterprise level system that integrates with this other really cool thing that we've built. And how does that play to a longer term strategy? And the fact that our leaders are coming to the table with that vision, with that passion, and folks like AJ and I and our CTO Clark and our others don't have to be the only ones to cultivate that has been really transformative for us over these past few years. And again, not to say that didn't exist in Creed's history all along, but it's been really fun to see that be a catalyst for really a lot of the existing business growth that we continue to see, and then the places that we can chase new business in the future.
Yeah, and it sounds like, though, it's an extension of that consultative mindset in some respect, right? Where innovation is bred from disparate thoughts being united, and that ability to say, oh, that team's working on this over here, I'm working on this over here, maybe in the Venn diagram of the problems, like there's a solution there. And I would say kudos AJ as well, because that takes a democratization of the process and the data and an understanding of what good looks like that is empowering those people to say, okay, not only am I responsible here in this particular project for margin, but how does that level up to these other areas and how can I potentially positively influence them? So I think you guys know me, I'm always about like how we can help build and grow our teams to take that ownership and bring those insights, because I think we're always better for the ability to have those conversations and innovate off them. But I think it's cool to hear that you're actually like, it's one of those things much easier said than done, because there's a training component as well as I think just uniting, and you all are hybrid. So it's, if you're not in the office every day, like how do you catch those moments which can seem fleeting and glancing at times? As you look at how you've baselined here, I know that your team has changed in some ways regarding even some of the portfolio, the work you're coming on. There's a consultative approach that we just mentioned. There's the less administrative, maybe we used to say agile, right? Is it agile? Is it not? Like, how do we not take so much of it? What other kind of insights do you feel like you've learned in 2024 that really are setting you up for success here coming up for the new year?
I think one thing that we, at least for me, I often think of baselining resources based on 40 hours a week, right? That's what we do. That's what we work. And I think one lesson I took to heart is, and this was not my doing, this was like when we're converting people and talking about utilization, like having conversations with the team about what does a real workload look like at Creed? Because again, to me, it's like 40 hours a week that's a workload, right? That's not necessarily true as a developer, particularly, and especially for those who are on teams where like collaboration and that ability to have just the baseline overhead, if you don't bake that into the workload, you're basically saying, guess what? 50 hours a week is your baseline. And that's where we start to get into that. We're killing people, right? We're mushing people. They're not doing their best work. And so it's all about recalibrating and making sure that those hours that we're actually utilizing are valuable hours and not just hours, right? And so a good example would be like developers at Creed, the baseline is 32 hours, not 40 hours of billable work, because we know there is that overhead collaboration that isn't just good for the clients, but it's good for the team, right? If every hour every week is accounted for per client, guess what? That team's not growing together. That team's not finding efficiencies outside of it. And so for me, that was a big takeaway this year, was like maybe like taking a step back from squeezing and realizing that by letting go hours as opposed to the 40 hours where everyone's feeling squeezed.
Yeah.
And that added certainly to maintaining that people first mission that we talk about too. And this isn't just lip service. We really talk about when we're planning the work, making sure there's time to do the professional development that we really want to invest in our team, and make sure that they're keeping pace with the, not only the skills, but the kind of skate to where the puck is going type of things that they're passionate about as well. And that takes intentionality too, and making sure we create those opportunities. And Clark, and I would say the other piece is, Grant, when when you mention like we're still in that hybrid environment, it means building team building too, and making sure that's factored in. And particularly when things are slow and then when they're busy, you can't win on either of those. So you got to balance all the time and make sure that we're upholding, again, that intent around being people first and how we meet people there. And we are really proud, I would say this, we spend a lot of time as an operations team making sure that we aren't overtaxing our team and that we are meeting the client demands and the unknowns that always pop up, right? The delays in approvals or somebody's got to be out sick, that we can react quickly, but that the kind of the downstream impact of that, we try really hard to make sure isn't overly felt by the team because of the amount of time and energy we put into making sure to mitigate that. So I think that's, to your point, AJ, where we've really held strong in the busiest and the slowest of times as well, with the same level of care and tending.
Yeah. And I'm going to shamelessly plug a couple values that like Parallax really believes in, because I think you've touched on them in how they're being applied in your everyday business. And I think that's the critical element there. Is these aren't just things that we espouse, but the democratization of the data, I think, is a big one, right? That accountability and leveling up of your team to say, we're going to maximize your time relative to your skill set. And we want you to grow. And AJ, you're touching on that with margin. The other one, though, that you brought up is essentially like this task versus duration-based planning. And that one's a really critical one, particularly too when you consider margin relative to keeping people healthy. Because if you're switching and context switching all day long, even if you're doing 8 hours of that a day for just 5 days a week, you're going to feel burned out. It doesn't matter. And that deep work that you all are talking about, which is something that when I was at Creed, like I really loved and I really valued out of, in particular, my design and dev team, to say that's even baked into your hybrid model. Like Monday, Wednesday, Fridays are deep work days. Like you are solving critical problems those days. Tuesday, Thursday, let's meet, let's unify around those solutions, talk about them. And those things have been so ingrained in me that I think it's easy for us to talk about them as, oh yeah, these are ideas, you should do that. But in practicality, it takes effort, takes discipline, and it takes a unity that the team understands that value. So I think that's awesome that you all are doing that. As you're looking at 2025, AJ, you laughed about AI. So you're not doing $1 billion AI investment. Are you offshore? Like what's making you excited about 2025?
I actually, because you just said offshore, one thing at least that I've noticed I'm really excited about is we are seeing the rising cost of offshore, right? Like it did not wait for a while. It's been rising. The cost of resources everywhere is rising. And so at least for us, we've taken a lot of solace, and I get a lot of passion out of the thought of bringing in more local resources, right? Mm-hmm. And we've seen a tick up of that. And that's no shade on our offshore resources. They have been incredible and will continue to use offshore resources, but it's not as cut and dry as it once was, right? Like it's not as like easy as, gosh, they're a fourth the cost. Like, we'd be stupid not to. And so it's a little bit more, I'm excited to bring in the right tool for the right project as we move forward, as opposed to bringing in just resources, right? Like you just bring in bodies to help cover things. And so being able to be a little more focused on that and bringing in people who specialize in certain things that maybe we don't do as well. And then, no, I don't think we're going to be investing in a full AI redo, but we also do have to make sure that we're keeping up with the Joneses and what AI is, right? There's no doubt that there are changes coming and there are pros and cons. Things are scary about it. Things are exciting about it. We're definitely not planning to be left behind in the dust. That's for sure. But I also don't think we're planning to stick our neck out as, AI experts who are leading the way in AI being the first and foremost path forward. Yeah. So I'm curious to see where things go with that. I've always been a little bit on the AI is scary train, and I feel like I'm always the devil's advocate. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's the best, but I also have some nerves about what it is.
Sarah, what's got you excited about 2025?
Oh, Grant, this wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't talk about AI, because it's certainly the hot topic. I'm proud that we've really leaned into kind of trying to understand where it makes sense. I think that it has some promise in operations. Certainly data is the currency right now, and how we can continue to lean into understanding what is available for our clients, their client data, how is it set up, how are those workflows, those disparate systems playing into the tools and the applications that we're building, and looking at those bigger picture. We may not necessarily add 20 Python developers to our team in the next year, but I think the fact that it's part of our assessment, part of that consultative approach, is something that we probably do need to continue to lean into and understand. And if it loses some of the steam, that's okay. So again, our partners look to us as the trusted advisors to know how to guide them in those efforts. And we want to make sure that we're able to do that. That said, I think 2025 continues to double down on what we're really great at and continuing to build those deeply committed partnerships where we are hyper focused on not only the tool that we're building or the solution that we're building, whether that's a custom project or an implementation or somewhere in between, but then how we're also looking future forward for them as to how their businesses may be changing or how their audiences might be shifting. And I think for us, that again takes a lot of focus on the Jira task in front of you, but also that broader consultative kind of forest for the trees type of experience that we've been really trying to build as a practice at Creed.
Have you felt in this conversation? Yeah, we talk about emerging markets with AI. Again, I think the theme that you just even says, we may not be a Watson expert, right? We may not be an open AI expert, but we understand data, that there's content that's all going to inform that. And we can actually help our customers in that regard, right? That's no different from our day to day. Have you found that you've been able to maintain your margins through that value propositions continue to be there? Or have you had to shift your kind of value prop through that process?
Like everything in agency world, it depends. It depends on the project, depends on the client, depends on the team. And I wish that there was a more specific answer I could give you there, Graham.
Yeah, okay.
I think maybe to color that a little bit, like I think even just recently we had a call with a client where I think historically we'll say what our billable rate is, and you might from some clients get this, oh my gosh, like what? How can anyone pay that? And then other people are like, are you kidding me? That's all? And it's not from the people you'd expect either. And so it is a crapshoot in a lot of ways about where our clients come from, what kind of budgets they have. Especially now, it's so hard to get a read on that. That I think at the end of the day, we are who we are. We know the value we can bring. We're not gonna grovel or change what we do to meet too many clients. Like there's fits and there's not fit, right? And I think sometimes and historically, not very recently, but like we've all had projects that weren't good fits, right? Like they weren't a good fit, and let's be honest, the outcome for nobody was good, right? Like it didn't benefit anyone. And so I think we actually have been focused a little more on our fit, right? As opposed to like making sure that we squeeze the right dollar out of the right people, because we've found that comes pretty easy with the right people when we're working with the right clients who have the same alignment of values and they've got their good head on their shoulders, stakeholders who are going to be involved, be engaged. We find more often than not that it's not as hard as you think to maintain those margins. But yeah, it's still a challenge at the end of the day. It's something we've got to constantly be looking at, constantly making sure that we're getting updates on. And then Parallax is obviously a great tool to do that, but to get those warning signs of when things are slipping or when things are maybe not what we thought they were, and making sure that there's a canary in the coal mine beyond someone raising their hand and saying, I'm in trouble. That's a key part of this, is all those warning signs.
Yeah. And I do see a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to wait until our Q&A, if that's all right, just because of the direction we're on in this conversation. But AJ, in that feedback loop, yes, I appreciate you saying the Parallax piece of, yeah, we want to know how the performance of a project is coming in. But is there a feedback loop as well to Sarah and the sales folks on these are the projects that are working, like these are the ones that aren't working, and sell more of this, but maybe take it easy on that? Like, how are those conversations occurring?
I think they happen organically. I'm not scared to speak my mind about a project we shouldn't do again or a project we should do again.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think I wouldn't say it happens like on a specific day or time, but I would say at least quarterly, we're doing a big look back of going like, where have the big wins been? Where have the not so great outcomes been? What's the commonality? And that can be traced down to some easy things like, oh crap, we just misscoped that. Or it could be like, do we have the right skill sets for this work? Do we like fundamental questions that help us put a new lens on and think a little differently about how we're pitching, how we're approaching things, where our value is? I think historically, though, it's been a lot of, because we have these teams, right? As I alluded to before, we can drill down by team as opposed to organization. Each team has specific skill sets, maybe a tech stack they work more predominantly in, different personalities, right? Maybe different seniority. And so we actually even drill down a little more team-based than we do organizationally, right? So like when they're saying, hey, we've got this hot new proposal, the first question is obviously who's going to work on it. And that might change completely how we approach that project depending on availability and the people who could work on it. There's one team who you go, they'll probably do really well, but this team could really knock it out of the park. And that fundamentally changes how we approach taking a project on or not. And also just how do we monitor and think about the margins, right?
One thing I'll circle back to is I'm really proud of the level of engagement too. When we've had project retros, it's not uncommon for sales or myself to be in them, to hear the challenges, hear the opportunities. And I think where we really feel that and carry that forward into the next opportunity opportunities. It really does give us data points. It gives us real sentiment that we believe needs to be actionable. And I think that's something, at least personally, I'm really proud of in that we've really baked into our business development efforts, certainly.
Yeah, I think one of the values we espouse here is, as an agency, when you go to market, you get to reinvent yourself to however you want to. And that doesn't mean that you should be having these large pendulum swings where .NET today and we're going to do Squarespace tomorrow, right? That's not the intent that we're getting at. But I think exactly to your point, Sarah, of saying whether it's conversationally, whether it's structured in a retro, whether it's a portfolio review done on a quarterly basis, what's the information that's allowing us to say, no, I can actually start to get my arms around a sales pipeline, right? I can start to feel empowered in a situation that it's an election year and now the year's gone to hell, right? Like that. The goal here is to say, what are the things we can do that we can bring to the market to help benefit not just our team, but hopefully to those customers. Like AJ, to your point, we want them to be successful as much as we want our teams to be successful. So I think that's really cool that you all are doing that in an organic way. More often than not, we hear more of the head, right? I'm just trying to sell. Like I've got a quota, and that's fair. There's nothing wrong. I'm not good at sales, and I appreciate people that are good at sales. But on the ops side, what am I inheriting here? I love the like no surprises sort of expectation. So that's great. Sarah, you alluded to this, and I'd be curious if you would be willing to share the KPIs as you're looking at how the organization has performed, and you're saying, oh man, we've learned a lot in 2024. Are there any KPIs that you felt either surprised you, that's, oh, this is more important than I thought, or were there any that you wish you had known about before?
I will let you speak to the operational ones on delivery performance, but the ones particularly for me on the new business side, and I guarantee every person on this call has probably seen a similar thing. I don't know if it was surprising other than how much it was a change. It was just the time to close, the amount of decision makers that were involved, like the amount of contacts added to, again, you're smiling because it was felt, but like when you actually see the data, my goodness, it just reaffirmed that like kind of butterfly that you were feeling, and not to make light of it. And that also lent to like where it made it tougher to forecast when would we be kicking off this work and how would those things happen. And painstakingly, I was looking at a number of those type of KPIs, and then how do those feed into Parallax, where then we would be needing to make sure we were resourced appropriately for so many of those unknowns that were just compounding, as we saw over the past really 24 months, a pretty big shift. And then now that's starting to, again, pick up in its velocity. But those were the kind of KPIs that I can speak to, and certainly were keeping me on the new business and business development front. Certainly on the operations side, and Grant, you were kind enough to provide a pretty solid matrix of strong KPIs when we were working together. We've continued to uphold those. But AJ, I'll pass to you.
I'll say the vast majority of our KPIs are very typical, right? I think everyone's looking to some degree at their profit margin and their EBITDA or whatever you're using for your interior kind of profit margin. I think some of the ones that we maybe care about that might be a little different than others is we focus a lot on obviously team happiness. That is a huge, like our engagement score and the feedback we get on a biweekly, monthly, quarterly basis from them. That might be the one that I don't want to say matters most, but it's a lot higher up there than probably you'd think. In fact, we're going through it right now and you'll get some feedback here and there that you're like, oh, okay, this is something we really need to drill down on and talk on, even if it's just one person saying one thing, right? Because that can have a cascading effect of us, again, not realizing what's going on at our company because we are so focused on these, let's be honest, numbers, right? Just numbers, right? Yeah. That's great. It's awesome. I love the numbers are the truth, but there's a whole other component here, right? Of is our team happy? Are they going to stay, right? Losing, I would much rather keep a client and the numbers drag, or keep somebody around that we don't have to re-onboard somebody on and we keep them happy and they stay a long time. That's where honestly Creed's secret sauce, if we had a competitive advantage, it's that people don't leave Creed very often. We keep people around and we keep skill sets and we keep people who do a good job and they stay there for a very long time. We've got multiple people that are over a decade now, a lot of people who are nearing a decade. That is a level of KPI that's hard to measure because at the end of the day, we have a ingrained knowledge and ingrained skill sets that we can't go hire a replacement for somebody who's been here 10 years. Beyond that, again, we're talking about portfolio mix a lot going into 2025 than we probably would have in previous years, especially with the way the market has gone. Some clients maybe get a little too high of the mix than you'd really like. Maybe it's a little higher than you'd be be comfortable having. And that might just be out of pure circumstance. But I think that's something we're going to look at with go through with a finer tooth comb next year, in addition to our obvious kind of sales metrics and hiring forecasts and project health.
We're getting up to Q&A session. We got a couple questions in the queue, so feel free to post there. I'm going to go back to one because I think it ties into your response there, AJ, around KPIs and hours and numbers versus relative production and employee happiness, right? But if you're at 32 billable hours a week, there can be a point of tension at times. How do you ensure profitability and high utilization within your teams that have 8 hours of non-billable time a week? How do you juxtaposition that?
It's not the easiest thing, but there's a few different things. Obviously, you've got to make the numbers work at 32 hours, right? Like you can't hire somebody at $1 gazillion and have them work 32 hours a week and then go, hey, why isn't this? There's basic economic inputs there. So let's assume that's all the same. Beyond that, the key is, how are those other 8 hours spent? Is it like just a slush fund of time for them to spend however they want? Of course not. It's about admin for that team. It's about your kind of ceremonies within the agile process. It's also development time, right? It's that, like, for developers especially, right? If you're starting with 40 hours and then also saying, we also expect you to get better at your craft on the side, that's a lot. And so we bake in that time of development, be it learning a new language or for my PMs, learning more technical information, whatever it may be. And so it's about using those 8 hours in a way that serves the team and the company towards those 32 hours being as effective as humanly possible. We want those 32 hours to be value that the client goes, gosh, I paid for these 32 hours, but it feels like we got 45 hours. That's the key kind of translation here. 32 hours, the numbers are the same, but the way people feel about the time you put in and then the time they're given by their employer, I think has a profound impact.
Yeah, there's an important concept too. And I think if the concern from this person is 32 billable hours not being a profitable metric effectively, I would definitely look at your cost structure. Exactly, AJ, to what you were saying. And then I would look at your bill rate and the type of work that you're doing and really baselining on those factors. But there's an important concept as you continue to scale and grow as an agency as well, called leverage, which is typically what you start to see when your billing structure and utilization numbers don't mature at the rate of your organization. And what I think Sarah and AJ have really hit on today really nicely is what we have a hard time attributing an ROI to is that 8 hours of non-billable time, right? But in reality, if those are investment times, what you're doing, this is Kinsley's 3 horizons, is looking at horizon 2 and horizon 3 of opportunities, be able to say and just even see those is a huge factor for the long-term growth of your organization. Follow up, assuming 32 hours is for production team levels. Yeah, I wonder if about billable target hours for leads direct. Yeah, so that is exactly leverage. So I think the question is going towards, if we're a production group and you're doing those tasks that are coming in, yeah, you might actually have a higher billable percentage or hourly per week. Yeah, exactly. And we'll see this, especially with some marketing groups where if you're doing ads or something like that, it's not duration based, right? It's really production work. And you can see those creep up, but exactly, we've got to balance how we're empowering those teams. And are we ensuring that we're, again, one of the bigger costs to an agency is going to be bringing in replacement people if someone leaves, right? And there's a number of studies out there. And so using tools, like Parallax, there's others out there as well, but getting that data is what's going to really help and inform you on how do we structure our teams to remain profitable, to make sure that we've got healthy billable utilization targets, and that we can continue to grow our business in a sustainable way. Another question that came in, Sandra, appreciate it, is how do you best enforce those deep work days? And how do you empower your team? In a culture of meetings to make decisions, how do you limit meetings? Who wants to take that one?
I could take a first attempt. It's funny because the culture of meetings is certainly very real. I know even at Creed, where we try really hard to evaluate and to AJ's point, be ceremonial about the things that we know every team needs to have structure around, and short of, this is going to sound a little bit ridiculous, but went down and measured the amount of meeting time that we plan for every single team member and what percentage of overall of those 30, 40 hours a week that we have, would that take up? We really did that level of assessment. And as a leadership team, use that to inform, like, okay, where do we need to have some conversations with our project leads around where are we getting the most value from these meetings and who really needs to be in front of them? And if we're involving that many people in a client-facing situation, situation, how is that providing the right value to clients? Again, questions that everybody asks, but I think being really intentional of looking at the data, looking at where those tasks that align to that time or that output are going, it just means taking the extra step to do the evaluation. And quite frankly, so many of those reports around like even planned versus actualized, and then coming back and doing a little bit of retro that AJ and I do around those projects, uncovering, because numbers are incredibly valuable. And I am certainly rooted in metrics, but there's also the nuance to it, right? And everything in the agency world, like why was what was assigned not actualized in the way, oh, okay, that makes total sense. And so there's that human component too that seek to understand that we, I think, have done a really good job of. But back to the meetings sometimes are important collaboration that are well invested in the turn or the spin that could happen if they didn't occur. So again, we're trying really hard to, I would say, empower our teams to manage their time and to do it in a way that is really going to provide the value that it needs to do. And if it's not, if we're not all in on it, then why are we doing it? And let's stop. And I think that seems so obvious, but it takes, again, being really cognizant of it. And it is a meeting culture. I know I hear that from a number of folks in various industries. Maybe an outcome of being in a virtual environment that felt like the work was the meeting, not the stuff that you set the tone for to be done after the meeting. So there's some work that even we have to do to break that maybe bad habit a bit too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd say maybe even to take it a step further, I think I'm going to keep talking about teams because it's my favorite thing, but we have some teams that they're fantastic at this, they have Fridays become heads down time and they block off the time and they really like to focus on their work. And we've got other ones where we've got a mix of really senior people and junior people where that collab is without that, just doing deep work time to allow a junior resource to just spin sometimes, it's not fruitful. That's not a good way to spend anyone's time. And so I want to say that I wish we could just level it out and make deep work across the board, but we do leave it up to the teams to work as they best see fit. And for some, that is a meeting culture and that works really great for them. And then the other thing I'll say, do as I say, not as I do. But as a leader, block off your own time and like set that standard yourself. Because I'll say I'm terrible about this, but I know others at Creed are much better. When we're setting the standard ourselves of like deep work time, that sets the value around, we value this here at Creed. I am going to put time aside for me to work on things, because when we're constantly on that hamster wheel of, yeah, put me in that meeting, put me in that meeting, put me in that meeting, to me, that conveys the value of, no, you're expected to be on a million meetings a day. And so it's just what rhetoric you're using and how are you setting the example?
Yeah. Two things I want to hit on is the analysis of the data. And when you're looking at timesheets in particular, you've got to, just the economics of it, in my opinion, and I'm coming from agencies that used to have a wall of shame, right? If you missed your timesheet, all this stuff, right? Like I've always been a proponent of like honey, not vinegar, right? Otherwise, you're going to get time that you want to see, not the actual real time that you can iterate and change your expectations off of. And Sarah, I think that's an important kind of element to what you're saying, because you want that data reflected accurately so you know what reality is and you can actually change. I think the other aspect of it, AJ, too, is like different circumstances for different skill sets. For a senior person, the meeting is important because that means the next day they're going to go and they're going to fix or solve a complex problem because you've defined that problem well in the prior meeting. For a junior person, it might mean actually there's a check-in at half day or at the quarter day mark to say, we still on track? Are we still good? And those can be impactful in that they affirm that we're on the right track, and that helps someone who's growing, that they feel good about that. Or it also gives them a lever to say, I didn't just waste a day hitting my head against this wall that I couldn't solve this problem, but I didn't feel like I could escalate it because it's a deep work day. Knowing that you have that flexibility is really important. All right, another one. We got about 5 minutes left. AJ, I know you've thought about this. Thoughts on a 4-day work week?
I'll have to watch my tongue here. No, I'm kidding. I think for me, I love the concept of a 4-day work week. Unfortunately, in the industry we're in, none of my clients work a 4-day work week, right? At the end of the day, I think there are ways it can be done in our industry really well, but it's going to require a level of planning that's going to be a little weird, right? Some people get Fridays, some people get Mondays, some people, right now it's difficult for that very reason of, I know the expectation from our clients is not we take Fridays off, right? They expect that Friday at 4, if the site goes down or something pops up, that we're available. And so I think it's an uphill battle for sure. I think the studies show that it's fruitful. I think that there is huge advantages to it. But when you're in the service industry, it's out the window to some degree.
Sarah, anything to add there?
I completely agree with AJ, and I do think that clients, particularly around some of the really complex type of applications that we've built in support for them, this equates to real business impact if something needs to occur. And more, I think the expectation is that you're available, and that may be after business hours too. And I know that makes people cringe, but yet you have to set up your business practices to support that if you're going to be able to support that caliber of client. And so that doesn't mean that a 4-day work week isn't possible. And I think one thing that we've tried to do really well at Creed is create, and this existed, Grant, when you were there, but those core business hours that are available for team members to really make sure they can collaborate with each other, that they could be planful about how to schedule their day and their time around client meetings, but then offering a lot of flexibility so that if you need to get your kiddos off to the bus or take an appointment, or you just have had I can speak even on Friday myself when we were doing some pretty extensive RFPs, like if you just need to take a walk around the block to clear your head because you've been focusing, that we bake in that flexibility to your schedule. So even if we're not on a 4-day work week, if you want to be done at noon on Fridays, we've built it into our flex schedule so that folks can do that. And I think that's been something that we've heard from our team members and really allowed us to be pragmatic in how we do our scheduling as well.
Yeah, I actually have experience working at a 4-day agency, but we were very production based and we could bake that into essentially under our SLAs. And exactly to AJ's point, if the expectation of the customer is a 5-day work week, it's really hard to fit a 4-day work week in without essentially 2 different teams generally. What I'd also say and echo what Sarah was mentioning is along with that, a flexibility of, okay, if you're expected to launch on a Saturday, typically you'll give people that Monday off too, right? Like you'll balance that out or you'll figure it out that way. And I think that is something I commend of your organization, because it is that understanding that we can set these rules and they don't need to be prohibitive. 4.5-day work week. Yeah, maybe I've seen that one, the Fridays off sort of thing. Minnesota's a typical summer kind of weekend thing. Before we go though, there is one more question. Agile dedicated teams. Does this mean that those teams are working on one project at a time, or that the team is working on a few projects at the time, but the team sticks together in the long run? So is it, yeah, go ahead, AJ.
More so the latter. Of course, if a client's going to pay us enough of a big enough project that we can dedicate a team around it, of course we'll do that. And in fact, it's usually designed, if I'm being overly candid, around maybe one big rock of a project and then a few others that are somewhat the same with that, be it the same tech stack, the same client, the same industry, some sort of commonality to make it make sense. So yeah, we've got 3 or 4 teams at a time. They've all got a differing amount of projects, but like usually the tech stack is the commonality.
We've got 1 minute left. I would do myself a disservice, and I might hear from our marketing team if I don't say it, but Parallax does have a timesheet out there now too. If anyone's interested in some of these best practices, even if you have a question would like to ask later on, or you want to pass on to Sarah or AJ any thoughts, or would like to partner with them, please reach out and let us know. We really appreciate everyone who is able to join today. I am extremely grateful to AJ and Sarah for joining. These are 2 of my favorite people that I've been able to work with, and I know the insights that you all are practically applying are not easy on a day-to-day basis, and yet we've had a lot of great discussion, and I've appreciated all of your efforts and just the conversation today. So thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Reach out if you have questions.
Thank you.